Thank you very much, Richard. Good morning. I always want to try to start out and lighten the mood up a little bit and tell a joke. And part of the presentation today, I'll be talking. Hopefully, if there's any questions at the end, we can have some time to have a little dialogue with the group. But along those lines, there was a professor who was taking a sabbatical from his job to go on a speaking tour, and he hires a driver to drive him around to each of the speaking events. And over the course of the 6 months, the driver sat in the back of the room and listened to the professor give the speech. And about 6 months later, he says to the professor, "Listen, I've heard you give that speech every time. I bet you I could do it just as good." And so they switch clothes, and the professor's in the chauffeur outfit in the back of the room, and the driver gets up and he gives the speech perfect, except he finished a little bit early and someone raises their hand and asks a question. And the driver says, "You know, that is the stupidest question I've ever heard in my life. That question is so stupid, I'm going to let my driver answer it." So, no stupid questions, please. Thank you. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about who the RCA is. Some of you may be familiar with RCA, some of you are members of RCA, some of you may even be on the board of the RCA. The RCA has been around for going on 20 years. This fall, we're celebrating our 20th anniversary. It started out as a good excuse to play golf, and we've continued that tradition by hosting the wireless industry's largest golf tournament. I think we're going to get a few hundred people playing golf in Las Vegas. But over the course of the last several years, RCA's evolved to become one of the premier advocacy organizations in the United States. And so what that means for us is that our membership now includes every wireless operator in North America, or in the US, except for AT&T and Verizon. So as you can look at the competitive landscape of the wireless industry, it's easy to see where a small operator from a Northwest Missouri Cellular all the way to T-Mobile and Sprint, their challenges are very similar these days. Talking about spectrum challenges and some of the rule makers and the regulations that are inhibiting the competitive landscape. So RCA shows up as an opportunity for these groups to come together and work together to create a more healthy ecosystem. And my role at the association is one that's continuing to evolve the capabilities. I'm the Vice President of Industry Development, and throughout this presentation I'll be detailing some of the things that we're doing on the business side to complement the advocacy efforts. So those of you who were here last year, you heard my boss, Steve Barry, the president of the RCA, talk about some of the challenges that the operators are facing these days. And if you look at the competitive landscape, it's continuing to be an issue, and there's continuing to be a distancing of what we call the duopoly, the AT&T and Verizon. And I use the analogy of NASCAR, where the AT&T and Verizon car is a couple seconds a lap faster than the other cars. So every time they take a lap, it doesn't look like much right now, but you fast forward 30, 40 laps, and they start to become pretty distant. And unless there's things that are happening to help these other operators, there's going to continue to be challenges. So we're working together both on the advocacy side and on the business side to help make a more competitive and healthy ecosystem. This slide kind of illustrates where the challenges are with, forcing our way into work with Verizon, AT&T, figuring out a pathway where we could do it ourselves or some combination of the two. And at this point, there's some very competitive challenges for our carriers. And on a regulatory or an advocacy standpoint, the issues with universal service, interoperability in the 700 megahertz band for band class 12 and band class 17, challenges with the device exclusivity where smaller operators don't get the iPhone, or they're just starting to get the iPhone. That's a good example where it completely makes it unrealistic to compete because I don't have the iPhone or the Galaxy S3. As these devices come out, it continues to make it more challenging. You've seen some of the plays in the spectrum space where the cable companies were selling the spectrum to Verizon. AT&T's just bought another block of spectrum, and it continues to disadvantage the smaller operators. If you take a look at the advocacy side and understand some of the issues you may be following on the Hill at the FCC, my focus is on what we're calling the Industry Ecosystem Development Group. And in this group, we're focused on kind of three disparate things trying to create a more healthy ecosystem. One is carrier internal facing solutions, so we're trying to vet and qualify solutions that would support a carrier's operations, like a Wi-Fi offload solution or a roaming hub. And we work with small and medium enterprise supply companies, things that would help to provide services that these operators could sell to small and medium enterprise businesses. And this could be cloud-based file sharing, or could be some kind of asset tracking, M2M solutions, et cetera. And then the customer-facing solutions, which are actual consumer products that we're building, like an Android app store that the carrier could have a branded solution that would allow them to do carrier billing and sell content to their subscribers. As you know, most of the operators don't have any relationship with Google or don't have any integration to be able to do carrier billing for Google Play. And so as a result, they're continuing to be disadvantaged. The over-top providers are, taking the revenues. I even had a conversation with one pretty large tier 2 operator that said they were meeting with Google and they said, we'd like to do an integration. And Google said, you're kind of low on the priority and we're not going to be able to help you out. And they said, okay, well, we'll go build it ourselves. And Google said, well, if you do that, then we won't ever do business with you. So it's really a tough environment if you think about the challenges in that kind of example where you're really, really stuck. So our ability to create those types of solutions are critical. Now, one of the biggest problems or challenges facing 700 megahertz or smaller operators are holding 700 megahertz is creating a framework for deployment of those services. As you may know, the 700 megahertz isn't getting a lot of traction in the chipset community and the device community. So having access to quality devices that include band class 12 hasn't happened. And so until there's really an anchor tenant or a nationwide tier 1 operator that's going to specify a 700 megahertz chipset in their device, these operators that are holding 700 are really challenged. So what we've done is convened a group of the operators that you see to try to work through this framework with folks like Sprint or T-Mobile to try to build what we call this nationwide 4G framework. It breaks down to kind of 3 different components. When you get down to it, there's the devices, which I mentioned is critical. Having a band class 12 inclusion, which could become relevant if they do a collapsing band 12 and band 17. That could be a pathway to get there. But just having the devices, a larger operator being able to have the buying power to make that happen is critical. The next piece is obviously the agreements. Creating an opportunity for 100 different operators to connect and manage that relationship is good, because if you're Sprint and you want to have a relationship, or you want people to roam on your network or connect to roam on theirs, it's pretty cumbersome to manage 100 different agreements. So being able to come up with some standardized language or standardized agreements to sign is critical. And then the last piece is the interoperability. So when you're deploying an LTE network, you look at the standards of 3GPP, and even if you deploy by the standard, it doesn't mean that your core will necessarily work with someone else's core. And so interoperability is going to become a huge issue as carriers are deploying these networks. So those are kind of the 3 critical pieces. RCA is looking to kind of shepherd this work through. So we're convening working groups on each of these issues to help the operators listed before kind of manage through this. And it's a very cumbersome process. Sprint is working on a solution that is a single radio device that uses what's called enhanced circuit switch fallback, which means that the device only has one radio and it camps out on an LTE network. So you're in a data session and then you have an incoming call. It signals to the phone over the LTE network, and then that call gets, your data session drops and it picks up the call on the CDMA network, which is good if you deploy enhanced circuit switch fallback. If you don't deploy that solution, then you really can't roam with Sprint, and then your options are pretty limited. So it's a big challenge for CDMA providers. If you get a dual radio device, you can do the 2 networks and you can manage it. And the devices today are all dual radio. Sprint's trying to get to a single radio device and then deploys ECSFB, and then the pathway gets to voice over LTE, which negates that requirement. So there's a lot of really interesting challenges that are coming about and going to be showing up for everyone deploying the service. And there's a lot yet to be determined. How do we get this done? So at RCA, we run or manage a group called the Business Innovation Group, or the BIG. And this is a carrier-only group that meets every month to talk about these issues and kind of vet and qualify solutions, prioritize what we're working on. It's senior level people within the operators. It's a group that's been meeting for, I'd say, about a year. And it was pretty interesting when we started these meetings. It was a lot of me talking and a lot of crickets in the background as the group tried to find its way to figure out the dynamics of the group. There was a couple conversations where a carrier from Alaska would call me after the call and say, I didn't know who this person from this North Carolina operator was, so I didn't want to talk about our strategy for mobile money or something. And I said, this isn't the time to be competing with these guys. We have many bigger challenges with over-the-top providers and tier one operators that these guys aren't really competing with each other. So over the course of several months and several meetings, this really opened up to this idea that there's a group of people where things can be happening, and it's starting to work really well. It's very interactive. We have our next meeting this Thursday, where one of the operators is going to be sharing the learnings and examples of their M2M solutions. So Southern Link, part of the Southern company, is finding great success in the M2M market. And we're going to hear from them directly on what exactly that is. It's examples like pond water level management, or a lot of asset tracking. And they talk about the difference between, I don't mean to steal your thunder, so I'll shut up in a minute here, but the idea of what the difference between a handset asset tracking solution and an embedded or installed. Things like that are starting to become really tangible use cases to help guide the operators to manage and decide what they're going to deploy. These guys are quite challenged with getting priorities and resources to make any decision. So the overwhelming or the continued theme amongst all the operators is, I know I got to make a decision on M2M. I know I got to make a decision on mobile money. I just don't want to make the wrong decision. And so we're trying to get this group together to create some mind share and understanding kind of what is the best path, or can we all agree on something? And if there's a use case that we can put together the aggregate resources of the RCA membership, then all the better. So at the bottom line for the BIG, it's about creating efficiency and saving costs and driving revenue. So one of the examples that we talked about with an internal carrier-facing solution was Wi-Fi offload. And so if you can imagine the challenge as these operators are trying to stay relevant, offering less expensive data plans, cheaper devices, but having the same costs and same network challenges as everybody else. And the easiest illustration is this slide here, where you talk about the average mobile data user today is doing between 500 and 600 megabytes, and 10 to 15% of the time they're roaming. That's expected to double next year, and the carriers are going to be quite challenged with figuring out a way to get that traffic offloaded. And the graphic down below, which is a little bit different, difficult to read, so small, but it introduces the exabyte to the equation. So now we're done with gigabytes and we're already past terabytes, so now we're doing exabytes. So if you can imagine how much data they're talking about seeing in mobile devices by 2016 is it measured in 14 exabytes, which is kind of unfathomable to me. Like, think about how much data that is. My first hard drive was like 8 megabytes or something. It's just and that you could never fill that up. So what we did to try to solve that as a trade association was we partnered with a company called Boingo, which you guys probably know if you've ever been to an airport. But they operate a few 100,000 hotspots all over the world to provide Wi-Fi access. And the Boingo solution we looked at in kind of 3 different ways. You had inbound roaming, so that if an operator had a Wi-Fi network, Boingo subscribers could be roaming onto their network. They have a joint build-out solution, so that if you wanted to build in a stadium or a college campus or something, Boingo could come and manage that for you on a premium or a free model, whichever they decided. And then where we focused most of our attention to solve the offload problem was on the outbound roaming, where RCA carrier members could be deploying or selling this product to their subscribers so that in an environment, even in their local market, they could be connected to a Wi-Fi network and therefore offsetting their data. It really was something we're quite proud of because we were able to get pricing from Boingo, I think, that is probably better than they've ever given. So it's a real good opportunity. We're just in the midst of the sales cycle now with educating the community of members. So we'll see. I expect to get some movement when we get to the show next month and have some use cases to share. But it's going quite well. We're quite proud of that. Another facet of the association that we turned up was a GSM handset buying group. So we put together, again, trying to leverage the aggregate member and the carrier subscriber basis to build some buying power. So we worked with an organization called Quality One Wireless to build a handset buying group. And this group's been around for about a year and starting to gain some pretty good successes. They started out with a bit of trepidation. There was some concerns over some antitrust issues, and so we engaged with some antitrust experts to form an opinion on that not being the case. So that's helped us immensely to go out and continue to build the community of members. And as we go forward and look at LTE as a solution, this group could be a source for those carriers, not just GSM operators, but any RCA member to be sourcing devices. So this is another facet of the association I think is doing pretty well. As I spoke about a little earlier, there was a need for some of these small operators to work with some international roaming partners. So we started to engage with some folks in the usual suspects and figure out a program that we could create, I'd like to say like an RCA member rate. So what we're trying to do is see where the vendor community can get exposed to the membership in a more beneficial way. And so we did a couple deals so far that we have, I think, enabled better, more favorable pricing for our membership. And so these are non-exclusive deals. It doesn't require the operator to do it. It doesn't, require, we could sign more deals. It's just we've signed an initial couple of deals. So the operator community gets together and decides, okay, this is the path we want to get forward, and then we'll execute on those deals. So we've just done a couple of initial deals. I think this may be getting announced next week. But it's something that, again, we're trying to provide some solutions for the operators. I spoke a little bit earlier about this carrier-approved app store. So if you think about a branded operator solution, so each carrier would have their own branded solution, but it's hosted by one core catalog. The catalog will be attractive to the developer because, again, it's a group of operators. It's not just one operator deploying their own app store and trying to manage to that. Some of the critical differentiators are the carrier billing. So I can now bill content to my phone bill, which drives conversions and creates a much more interesting experience for both the subscriber and the carrier. So this is launching this month. Some examples, it kind of breaks down to 3 different components. We have a web version of the store, so you can go on the website and push the content down to your phone. We have a branded Android app, and then we have a branded ingestion portal. So the developer, in about 4 easy steps, signs up. No cost to the developer to load their content in, specify a price, and then they're in the content catalog, and then that propagates out to Hawaii, to Eastern Carolina. Everyone who's taken the App Store would have access to that content, but each carrier can have specific features if they wanted to, because in Hawaii they may be into surfing, so there may be more surfing apps in Hawaii, but there's probably some kid in Hays, Kansas who's a dreamer, and he wants to know what the surf conditions are as well. So we're just getting going with that, like I said, and a couple of pictures where you can see, we're using Nextext branding here, but it gives you an opportunity to specify certain things, but the look and feel for everyone will kind of be the same. Screenshots of the mobile app, so you can see this, and this is going to be live here in another week or so. I think will be better examples when we get to the show in September. You'll be able to see that as well. So now we look at some new initiatives and what we see coming down the pike. We focused on the App Store and the Wi-Fi offload first. Now we're going to be looking at some additional things. Some of you may be familiar with the One API program at the GSMA. If you're not, it's an opportunity for operators to expose some APIs. One API is going off 4 initial APIs, which is really just a doorway into their network to have access to some kind of information. I kind of use the file cabinet analogy. If you had a file room, it would give you access to the file room in the specific drawer in the specific file, but that's it. So in the One API solution, they're doing SMS, MMS, carrier billing, and location. And so a developer can develop one time and connect to this One API solution and really have access to operators all over the world. There's a couple other schools of thought that make it a little bit more operator specific and expose different APIs. One of them could be something like a ability to autofill a form. If you've ever tried to fill a form out on your mobile phone, it's quite cumbersome, and the conversion rates of somebody actually doing that is probably 20 to 30%. So you have 60-70% fall off rate, and what Target would love to do is to give that subscriber a button that says autofill this form, click yes. That information gets dipped from the carrier's database and auto-populated. So now you're doing 2 clicks in 11 seconds instead of 13 clicks in a minute and a half. The user experience and conversions are obviously much, much higher. The asset recovery program is an example where people are losing their phone or they're trying to manage against theft. I think the churn prediction is pretty self-explanatory. People have a challenge of trying to see not just that people have a propensity to churn or what might drive that behavior, but also create offers and vision and programs around saving those customers, right? I mean, think about the cost of a customer acquisition being $600-700, and these smaller operators are paying higher subsidies and keeping the subscriber less time. So it's really critical. Mobile money, M2M. I'm not going to talk. I know we have speakers coming up that are going to be going into much more detail, but one of the challenges that we have at RCA, I think, as a community, is that we don't do a great job of defining what exactly these things mean. So we hear a lot of times mobile money or mobile wallet, but mobile wallet to you may mean I'm using my credit card on my cell phone. It could be I have a relationship with the bank on the phone. It could be none of that. It could be near field. I mean, there's so many different variations of this that it gets very cumbersome for someone to think about deploying a mobile money solution. And again, back to the hitching your cart to a horse. You want to make sure you're not hitching it to the wrong horse. Mobile money is a very good example of that. There's so many different examples of pathways that we just don't know where it's going to end up. And the same to M2M. So what I did, and I hope this is just try to illustrate the complexity of what an M2M solution looks like and what it could look like. And so when you go to an operator and you say, hey, I'm going to deploy an M2M solution, that's like this, something like this, or it's something like this. So it's my suggestion, what I try to talk to the operators about doing is kind of focusing on a specific vertical or focusing on a specific turnkey solution. So if I'm a small operator and I don't have a big sales force or an opportunity to really train everybody how to sell M2M, if I came with a parking meter solution for a local municipality, and I know Jim in sales is the guy who deals with the government people, I can take this to Jim and say, here's the solution, and it's turnkey and it's easy. So one of the things that we're focusing on is kind of distilling it down to specific verticals, making sure that it's interesting for the operator and easier to take, because they just can get overwhelmed very quickly. So lastly, I want to invite you all to join us at our show in September in Las Vegas. If you haven't been to an RCA show in the last year, it's changed dramatically. The event in the spring was oversubscribed. It was our best event yet. We expect this to be even bigger. We're celebrating, again, the 20th anniversary of the association, so we're having a big gala dinner Sunday, the 23rd of September, and then we'll have a follow-on of a few days in Las Vegas to share. And again, there's a nice floor that's oversold. I think we're sold out on sponsorships. The golf tournament is really a great event. If you've never been, I would encourage you guys to join. And if there's any more information that I can provide, please let me know. But I appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity to speak with you this morning.